So I'm very excited about our next keynote conversation today. Living and working at the nexus of media and technology, Mr. Fred Beteille is an industry veteran with over 20 years experience in the media and technology industries. Currently, as Meta's Director of Sound Design and Audio Product Platform, he's responsible for idea incubation, research and development, and ultimately the launch of the company's products within the realm of music and audio. He joined the company in 2017 and was instrumental in the development of Facebook Live. Prior to this, Fred was a product lead at Google and YouTube, where he worked on initiatives ranging from content ID, monetization, and rights management, music apps, and more. And to moderate this conversation, I am excited to introduce to you Miss Melanie McLean, who is a New York-based Web3 world builder, culture curator, 2021 Billboard Change Agent, member of the BAYC community, and the founder of Blurred Lines. She's also the head of community at the Web3 company Pools, where she helps musicians, athletes, brands, and creators build worlds and communities around custom cryptocurrencies. Fred and Melanie, you're so excited to have you guys here. You're welcome to be here, and I'm just gonna hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm introduction. This is gonna be a really great conversation. We're talking to the people who are really shaping the minds of the builders of the future. I've heard that this year the conference has been very tech focused, and I think that's really important when it comes to talking about music education, combining the worlds of tech and music. So how are you doing today, Fred?
Doing great. How are you doing, Melanie?
I'm doing good. I think a great way to kind of kick it back is like going to your early beginnings. I know you, well, I guess I'll say, where did you go to school if people don't know? I don't think we said in the introduction, where did you go to school? And I'm curious, since we're saying a lot of tech talk is happening today, what was like your music education when we were in school, and what kind of things that you wish, now that you've had like this amazing background, you kind of wish you had applied now that you are in this space now?
It's a great start. Great question. First of all, thanks to the association for having us. This is an area that's I'm personally passionate about. I've been spending a lot of time this year talking at various colleges, and I've learned a lot. One of the things I've learned is just a lot of, I would call it curiosity about what's happening in tech. And I don't think a lot of folks know exactly how to process it all. You know, things are happening so fast. So thanks for this opportunities, because I really enjoy this, and any chance I get to kind of bridge any gap. So it's great to be here. In terms of where I went to school, I went to NYU. I graduated NYU in 2000 with a degree, with a bachelor's of music, with a concentration in music business management. What led me to that was, I started playing music when I was about 7 or 8 years old, played clarinet, saxophone. That led to many, many other instruments, and I just loved music. But I guess somehow I was born from, two accountants. So I also had this sort of like logical upbringing, rooted in, numbers. And so when it was time to that, I think every student faces this, existential question: what do you want to do with the rest of your life? What do you want to major in? What do you want to do? And it was about 17, something like that. I was like, well, I really love music. I'm pretty good at that. And my parents are accountants, so I understand the fundamentals of business, or whatever it is. So I'm going to do music business. And so that's what led me there. And it was a great experience. I was in the middle of Manhattan. I got exposed to not just the educational side of like learning about things like theory and performance and all of those things, but got to like learn more about in practice what was going on in the music business by doing things like internships in New York, and just experiencing that type of lifestyle. In terms of what I felt like was missing, or I could have been enhanced, how my experience could be enhanced there. It's like, as soon as I got out of college, while I was in college, I think it was my senior year, I did like a double dip or whatever it might be. I was still a student. I was still a senior, and I picked my classes that were really early, and I would jet uptown to Midtown. And I worked as a paralegal-ish at an entertainment law firm. And that's really where I started learning about the music business and how it worked, and generally the entertainment business. And so, as soon as I got there, I realized like there was no technology that was really at the time supporting contracts, contract administration. and a light bulb went off. I was like, wow, like a lot of these things that I'm being asked to do or like that are happening around me could be made more operationally efficient or better or whatever words you want to use to describe it with technology. And then from there, I went to the Harry Fox agency, and it was the same thing. It was like a company that's doing music licensing, but generally it was for a physical world, and the world was moving towards digital. And there was an opportunity to learn how technology worked to support that, and to have how technology could help scale things like music licensing as one example. And then as I was having these experiences, I realized I had no experience in technology, nothing, no education in it, no practical things I'd done in it. And it was so I had to learn, right? So I spent a lot of time Googling. Like I vividly remember the day I was Googled, what is a database? I mean, like that's where it started. And so I learned by doing, and I did it on my own. And one of the things, broadly speaking, that I think could have been enhanced is that, while I was in college or whatever, it would be great if I could have learned all the basics of technology, so I didn't have to do it on my own late at night or whatever, kind of like as one specific use case. But I think broadly, I think technology and media and entertainment have merged, right? And there's really no way around that. Like you access the media of today through technology applications. And so I feel like students are done somewhat of a disservice if they don't understand the fundamentals of both, like their craft, whatever it is that they're studying at school, but plus how that craft is applied, which in this case might be through apps or technology or things that we've yet to develop. So that would be one helpful tidbit that I would pass on.
No, that's great. I know there's a lot of educators right now who are patting themselves in the back for all the things they're taking notes on right now. They're like, okay, I'm going to bring this to my students, because I think that is the changing landscape of it. It's not just like, reading the Donald Capson book and, understanding about doing how to work at a booking agency or, doing splits with a publisher. Is really understanding this and finding how these worlds come together. And your background is being a musician and a songwriter. I think that really impacts them. And I like to feel like you are really defining what is the sound of like the metaverse. You're really defining the sound of just, what it comes to clicking something on Facebook Live and things like that. That musical ear you have is all embodied in all these things that you're doing right now. So one amazing thing, kind of going back into your background, you have a background in working on platforms like YouTube and Google, and now you're doing amazing things at Meta. Just kind of let's go into some basics, right? Let's make sure people, before we go really into the nitty gritty, people know the fundamentals. So one big thing that, you were doing in the past and now you're doing now is talking about things like content ID. And I think that a lot of times when it comes to uploading your music on a streaming service, or, someone might sample something, content ID is a really, really big thing. And I think a lot of times we're in the era where people have a lot of autonomy, but at the same time, content ID can have their back, or it can stop them in their tracks. So I would love to say, can you kind of break down what content ID is, just so when we talk about it later, people know what we're talking about?
Sure, no problem. It's an important thing to understand the fundamentals of. So content ID at YouTube, for those that don't know what it is, it's a system that basically helps manage rights and protects content on YouTube. So imagine, let's take a practical use case. So let's say I upload a video to YouTube. That video will be scanned by the system called Content ID. And Content ID is trying to identify what's in the video. Now, there's a bunch of things it's trying to identify other than just rights, but for this use case, I'll focus on the rights. So let's say in my video, let's say it's a family video of my kids playing in the backyard, right? So it's something I want to upload to YouTube, put it on my channel, whatever it might be. Let's just say I'm not even into monetizing it at this point. We'll get to that in a second. But let's say I pick my favorite song and I put it in that video. And let's say that song is owned by a major label, whatever, but it doesn't matter which one it is. So Content ID will scan that. It'll look for, hey, is there any video embedded in this video that belongs to another video owner? So it's looking for hey, did I upload a clip from Star Wars into that video that might not be available to be able to be used by a creator? And then it'll also look at the audio and say, hey, is this a song or a piece of audio that is owned by someone else? If it finds that, it takes appropriate business action, automatically based on what the rights owner has chosen to do. Generally speaking, the rights owner can choose to do three things: monetize it, What that means is, hey, if that creator wants to monetize and that creator's using my content in it, I will allow that person to put ads on that video, and they will share in revenue with me. So they'll split the revenue across the rights owners and the video owner. The other option is you could track it, meaning you just allow it and you get information about how it's used that you might find useful later on, just data, or you can block it, meaning the copyright owner will have the chance to stop it. It's a little bit different than copyright strikes, which you might have been referring to before about how sometimes Content ID isn't your friend. But that's generally what Content ID is doing. It's a scaled, administration platform that allows various things to happen and businesses to happen on top of YouTube. Meta and other platforms have different ones. So Meta has something that I help build with engineers and other product managers called Rights Manager. It does a very similar thing to Content ID. Lots of rights owners upload their what they call reference files. So again, movies, clips, audio, all that stuff goes into what they call a reference database, and everything that gets uploaded to Meta, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, whatever it might be, gets scanned against that reference set, and then it can apply what the rights owners want to happen with that content. So it's a giant rights administration platform. All platforms either have them or need them, and it's a huge thing. Now, one of the ironies about how I got to YouTube, just as an interesting example, is after Harry Fox, I was mentioned before, I joined a startup called RightsFlow, and that company's job was to facilitate licensing transactions between digital companies like Spotify or YouTube or whoever it might be, and music publishers. And when I joined YouTube, YouTube was not monetizing at all, meaning it wasn't like an ad, wasn't making money, right? It was just at the time when people thought of it as like, oh, that's where you upload your cat videos or some funny video, but it wasn't necessarily like a commerce engine. And while there were a litany of things that prevented YouTube and in the future, like other platforms, from generating income and creating an economy around it, Content ID, in my opinion, is like the single greatest thing the single biggest thing that allowed YouTube to move to a monetization realm. And specifically, like YouTube had the recognition, Meta had the same recognition. We can't start monetizing these platforms. And what I mean by that is not just like making money for these companies. It's like creating an economy for both creators, for Meta, for users, right? A new thing, a new enhancement to these economies without protecting rights appropriately. And so that's what the system does. And so that system is not just about protecting rights. It opens up opportunities for the future, like monetization. And then as we talk, I'm sure through Web 3.0 and everything else, it's sort of will be the backbone for that as well.
Incredible. Yeah, I know we both crossed paths, we didn't know each other at the time, but both working at YouTube around the same time. And, for me, it was more of a playlist curator. And you were making sure that, like, when I was working with Little Nas X, you were making sure that, when he was Simple 9 Inch Nails, that everything was coming up right and everything was copacetic.
Yeah. I always find I'm sort of like this interesting person that I feel like I'm looking for the next opportunity, and I'm trying to build that infrastructure so the things that you just talked about can happen. And sort of like not everybody's rotating in that orbit, but that's where I like to rotate.
No, it's great. I mean, I think that's, this conversation is going to be really great because I think, we're seeing that the things that have been done in the past, things to be built in the past, are really impacting what's happening now. I mean, you look at, you're touching everything, from Reels to rights management, to, what is the sound of the metaverse right now. So talking about some cool things that you've been doing at Facebook with Reels, I'm really curious, how have you been like really using sound and audio? Like what things have you kind of built and are building right now when it comes to like platforms like Reels? I think everyone, from their mom to students to your favorite professor, I think everyone's either been sharing some Reels, been posting on some Reels. So can you tell us a little bit some of the things that you've been building with Reels?
Yeah, sure. So trying to think of the right way to answer this question. So one of the things that I think is interesting is to think through some of these technological changes that we've been going through. And to your point, they like ladder or stack on top of each other. They're interconnected. They seemingly disparate when you look at them like from the outside, but no, like they're very much like tied. So you think about Facebook as an example. So like when Facebook started, mainly people were looking at photos, right? And then text, but like kind of like lo-fi media right? There was no video, right? It's like kind of like bizarre to think about. Like similar with like YouTube, like kind of like it was just a different time, right? So then video comes about, and there's long form video, and that's where Content ID, like for example, comes into play. And so now it's getting much more complicated, right? So it's like not just like text, it's not just photos, which are pretty easy to handle, both from like a technical bandwidth, perspective, but also from like a rights perspective. But it's a smaller business. But now we have long form video, right? And in that, I think like, and everything up before long form video, we have no appetite for sound, right? There's like nothing, right? So like you don't need sound when there's a photo, right? You don't need sound when there's a piece of text. But now there's a video, and like Star Wars would stink if there was no sound, right? Like movies, the music is non-existent without sound, right? A music video is pretty bad without sound, or it's incomplete, right? And so I think like when you bring in the advent of video, you also bring in the advent of like the need for audio becoming I guess a first class format as it relates to video. Still not primary like video is at that point, but still it's becoming important. When you move all the way over, allow into like short form video, which is Reels, and then even into the metaverse, audio weirdly takes an even more important like role. So like if you think about short form video, whether it be TikTok, whether it be Reels, whether it be anything, even the gaming platforms where like Twitch, like audio is a huge factor in that. And so, there's a lot of different approaches in order to make, creators and people, use audio better or more access to audio. So some of the things that we built for Reels specifically are, imagine we have a product called Sound Collection, which is basically a collection of sounds and audio that creators can use in their Reels for free, right? YouTube has a similar product called the YouTube Audio Library, similar type of thing. So banks of audio to give like creative prompts or inspiration to creators that make the Reels. Other things we've built are the ability for people, it sounds silly, but or simple, but the ability for people to add mainline music into their video. So not just music that we've given them or sounds that we've given them as creative like inputs, but like what's their favorite song? Like they should be able to add that to Reels. So you have to imagine back to the arc that I was talking about, like there's photo, there's text, there's video, there's no sound, right? Now we have to create the ability for people to be able to upload sound into that, and then for them to add their favorite songs and have rights systems deal with that. So I would argue that the backbone of Reels, in terms of like the sonic side, because I know we're talking about music in general here, I'm not speaking so much about the video aspects, is really just the ability for those things to exist and creative prompts for users to go in and do that. Now, in the future, and this came out, I think, earlier this week, we're also starting to support NFTs on Instagram and Reels. And so like integrations with, some of the predominant coins and backends will be supported. And that's another part, I think, an evolution, and in a way that audio will be extended throughout those platforms. I don't know if that's specific enough, but.
That was great. Now, for anyone who's in the Web3 space, we use the term alpha. So I think you just gave us some alpha. I'm not sure if everyone knew about Instagram incorporating NFTs. That's super, super exciting. I know that's like the biggest buzzword. I know even with Spotify, when it came to Spotify Rap, that they made like a joke about NFTs. So I'm curious, like, how long has that been down the pipeline? Because I think that's a reoccurring thing that you've been saying. A lot of these things are not, oh, this is a buzz and I see people talking about it in the news. It comes up. It's something that you all have been like really eyeing for a long time. So how long have you all been looking at NFTs, and what ways are you planning on incorporating that into the platform right now?
So I think like in terms of how long people have been looking at it, I mean, I think you have to imagine these companies are huge. There's R&D teams. There's people that are looking at these things for some time. And I think like, with that said, I think there's, we have to make judgments about what to invest in and when, right? So it's like, are you going to be early? Are you going to be late? Or is the market ready for that? Are people ready for that? We've been looking at this space for some time, and there's been talks about various commerce systems that involve tokens or cash or different types of things that have been contemplated for many, many years, right? Now, in terms of like, why now? I think it's just maturing to the point where practical applications are becoming possible, right? And there's clearly a demand for it. Now, I personally have a point of view that to your point about like, is it just a buzz? Is it just a fad? I think we're kind of in the middle of that arc where like, there's definitely like a buzz fatty part to it. But I think there's elements of these enterprises or whatever you want to call them that will stick. And so an example of something like that might be like, all right, so everyone's hot a buzz about NFTs, but the reality of it is like, if you don't have a following and if you don't have something cool to offer that following or those fans, like why? You know what I mean? So it really comes down to either developing a great product or having a great offering or being something so compelling that people want to engage in that with, right? So like, it's really wide ambiguity about opinions on whether like on an individual basis, it's worth it or whatever. But some things, like to what I was talking before, are sustainable. And an example of something that would be sustainable, in my opinion, in the NFT world is something like the ability to manage smart contracts. So imagine like automated, especially when you're thinking about rights, content ID, and music and audio and all that. I mean, and what that is, like most simply, is like the ability to encode contracts in technology. So like think about in a blockchain, encoded in there are business rules around contracts. And because it's encoded in the technology and the technology can be integrated widely, it allows automation of things that wouldn't be automated before. So silly, not really silly, but like examples might be silly. I mean, simple, it could be like mashups of a song, remixes of a song. I mint an NFT of a particular piece of audio. Melanie uses it. And we, in that contract that we have enabled between each other, I get 10% and she keeps 90%. That all can be automated now, where in some future state, but the root of the technology is there. So I think like that's something that'll be long lasting, whereas on an individual basis, it could be fatty still. And so I think like it's the right time to invest in this stuff because like there are enough sustainable things that will continue no matter where this all shakes out.
That's great. And I feel like I love when people mention something and they explain it at the same time. So I was going to say, like, what's a smart contract? I think you explained that really, really well. Please, if you haven't already, definitely in the chat, feel free to ask questions. At the end, we're going to have 10 minutes for questions. But at the same time, if you're like, what does that word mean? Can you break that down some more? Please, this is the time for it. We want to make sure that when you walk away from this, you feel empowered. You can empower the students you work with every single day. This is what this is made for. And I think that what you mentioned, smart contracts, I think that is something big. People say NFTs, that's a buzzword. I think smart contracts are going to be the big buzzword, especially in music. I mean, there's a lot of music platforms like Sound on XYZ, Catalog, Mint Songs, and others. And we're seeing right now there's people who are making songs and compilations. And just like how you have a split sheet, the smart contract is making sure that, okay, the producer, they're going to get 25%, that co-writer is going to get 10%, the other writer is going to get that other percent. So there's a lot of really practical use cases that, instead of kind of fighting like, okay, did I write that song? Let me check on that person 6 months later. Smart contracts kind of always have our back. So really, really interesting. Once again, I want to make sure we go into like the big buzzword everyone's been talking about, metaverse. A lot of times when people hear metaverse, they think of Meta. Can you kind of like take us back to like the big announcement? Because I think, there's a lot of platforms, there's Sandbox, there's Decentraland, there's other ones, but can you kind of take us back? Like, what was it like when that big announcement happened? But I think that's one of our moments of like accessibility, when it comes to this metaverse. Can you take us back to that moment?
Sure. Yeah. No, that was an interesting time for a variety of reasons. I think, when I think about that, the way that the public reacted to it, there's one like meme out there that like, Facebook changed its name because it was getting flack for whatever the issue du jour was at the time. Could be privacy, could be whatever it is, right? And that's just not true, right? Like ever since I've been at Meta or Facebook, there's this strange phenomenon where it's 5 or 6 different apps or companies within one, and there's an enormous amount of confusion around like I work at Facebook. It's like, okay, well, but I don't work on Facebook, right? That is kind of like the scenario that I was in for a while. Like I was working across Facebook by working at Facebook. And so I think that there was this misunderstanding that Facebook Inc. was a mix of all of these wide properties, and that each of those properties has billions of users, generally speaking, the big ones, right? And so there was always this misnomer around like calling it Facebook once the company got bigger and bought Instagram and WhatsApp and Oculus and has the messaging platforms. It's enormous, right? So I think it was appropriate for them to create some form of other name, other shell, whatever it might be. Then as it relates specifically to like the metaverse, so I think like that's the primary reason, right? Or one of the primary reasons is to get rid of some of that confusion that might be out there in the marketplace. At the same time, Mark has a vision for how all of this can come together in the future. And so like at the time, I think there was like tons of questions inside our own company, because it was also a tight thing. It wasn't necessarily like everyone in the world knew about it at all times leading up to it, right? Because it's a very, confidential thing that people were working on. I think as it relates to the metaverse, I think what we're seeing and part of the vision is this advent of a new digital world or a new frontier that's upon us, where instead of the internet being this thing that's sort of like, I think is a dissonant thing. So what I mean by that is like, if I want to access it, or communicate with people, I must use this. And it's dissonant because I'm not part of it. It's something that's apart from me. So we always lament people like sitting at the table, like with their family, and they haven't talked in like 2 days, but they're staring at their phone feverishly in their own world. Like that is dissonant, right? And so I think what the metaverse is going to be is a set of experiences that range from, VR, which is the one that everyone sort of can grasp. They put the goggles on and they're in this other world. But then there's also things that I personally find more interesting is something that's called mixed reality. And then also something augmented reality. And those are two different things. I can talk about them real quick. So think about VR being like the Oculus. You put the headset on, you are literally in another world, right? You can experience presence with people. Like we could be in a virtual reality room in Horizon. We could be interacting with our avatars, but you're experiencing these things. I've done some cool things in Oculus now, like visit the ISS space station and I'm floating around in outer space, right? You know what I mean? I'm looking down at the Earth. Like it's amazing, right? You don't actually feel like you're in space, but you feel like you're present in another space, right? So that's VR. I think people have a good grasp on that. Mixed reality is something a little different. It's where imagine on some sort of device, there are cameras that can take a scan of the world that you're in. And so it could be either in black and white or in color. And then in that, so you see that world in your lens, and then you can put objects into that world, like so let's say a digital object into that world, but you're looking through a lens or in a lens. So that's mixed reality. So it's like making a copy of the reality that you're in into a screen, and you place digital objects in that screen. Where I think it gets less dissonant or whatever, least dissonant, is with augmented reality. So you imagine a device where you're in the real world. This is what excites me. Like you are in the real world, and the technology hopefully is elegantly infused into that experience, such that the technology is not, you don't require to stare at something else and engage somewhere else. It makes you more present in the world you're in. So examples of this could be like you're walking down the street, and instead of saying like, where's the nearest restaurant? Like an overlay could come up and say, the restaurant's over here, in your visual field, or through through audio speakers that exist in a lot of the augmented reality glasses. So I think like, if you think about, that's kind of like the fundamentals of like what is happening around, in terms of hardware, in terms of experience that can be built, for the metaverse. But like, what is the metaverse? I think there's like some interesting examples I've been trying to use, because I have to explain this to like my parents or like my grandparents, you know what I mean? To anybody, right? And it's like, what is this? And I have to try to explain it to myself, because it's difficult to really comprehend like the breadth of what it could be, But so let's take these different things and imagine what you could do with them. So imagine you're in virtual reality, and one of the big things that happen in virtual reality is we make maps of spaces that exist. So theoretically, you could make a map of New York City, right? And it could be like a pixel for pixel carbon copy of that city. you can imagine doing that for the whole world. Like imagine unlimited resources, unlimited time, unlimited whatever, right? You could have that copy, right? So that you could experience that in virtual reality. You can walk around, you can do that. So then in that virtual reality world, now you have a copy. You could start placing objects into that digital world. So like if a store is having a sale, it could put up a digital sign that says, there's a sale in here, right? And they could target me and say, you like stuff in this store, come in here. One example. Or more fun, you could be like, I want balloons here because I feel like having fun and having balloons here. Or like, I want King Kong to climb the Empire State Building because I want to see that. And so you could do that in virtual reality, right? You could make computers do that, right? You can code that and do that. But then imagine that could carry over into an augmented reality. So now you're in the actual New York City, right? We've made our map. We now have the objects that we've placed in the city, and now you see them in the city through your glasses, right? And in that, you could be walking down the street. I could call you, an interface might pop up in front of those glasses, and we can have a conversation. And everything is just less and less dissonant. So imagine the internet in that way, like if you abstract it all the way out, could be overlaid on top of the world that we're in. So imagine it's something that you not necessarily like you like touch like on your phone or you're kind of apart from. It's like something that you're in more than something that you like touch or watch, right? And it's a hard thing to understand or to like really like grok mentally, but that's kind of like some interesting use case to think about to help get a mental model of what that could be. What makes it really, I personally think it makes it interesting is like if you overlay something on top of what exists, you've created something new and something more. And I think like the opportunities that that will be created by doing that are almost limitless, right? Like you almost think of a doubling of the opportunities, right? If you're creating this sort of like parallel layered thing on top of our existing world, it creates more opportunity for more people. And that clearly we need that at this time, right? It also lends itself to like all sorts of other interesting opportunities like accessibility, diversity, inclusion, all sorts of things that like are hard to do in the real world are a little, I'm not saying they're not hard to do in the digital world, but there's opportunities to make things better in that world because you're starting new. And it's something that you can build into product principles, right away. So I kind of see this as like a long haul. I think people are a little like caught up, like, so Meta changes its name, the company changing its name is a little different than saying the metaverse is here, right? So that's where I was trying to start with like the decoupling of those things. This is something that's going to take years and years of investment by multiple companies, hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of creators and individual people. And ultimately, like if we can't build products that are like enjoyable by people and that make people's lives better or create that more opportunity, things aren't going to work, right? So like it's up to us, the collective us, to build things that really just enhance people's lives and not detract from it. And I think there are a lot of like cautionary tales that we can obviously learn from like this huge technological revolution that we've all been through over the years. A lot of things did not go great, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of challenges at like a societal level about how we manage this stuff. But I think like that's the opportunity that we have in front of us is to get that right.
Incredible. Yeah, I think I first got on Facebook maybe about 2005 or so. And at that time, it was posting my photos from like, homecoming and, school dances. And I think the next step up is the next generation, Gen Z, when they're having like their school dances, when they're like, okay, like, what restaurant should we go to? Like, that is going to be the platform that's going to help them decide should they go to that restaurant or that restaurant based on just what fits them best, based on what time of day, what the occasion is really going to, as you said, help improve our lives.
Another, sorry to interrupt you, another great example of something that's like an improvement of people's lives. I think it's something Google announced at I/O maybe this week before, something like that. But it's also something that a lot of other companies have been thinking about. So imagine you have some form of device on, like glasses or something, and it kind of seems like ridiculous, right? You're like, oh my God, am I really going to wear these things? Like they have cameras on them, they have speakers on them. But then you imagine like, all right, I travel a lot, right? I've been to like Thailand and places where I don't understand the language at all. My wife is part Vietnamese. She was born in Vietnam. And so my in-laws are Vietnamese, and I can't understand a single thing they're saying when they come over, and they're speaking Vietnamese, right? They speak English too. But when they're talking, like, I would love to know what the heck they're saying, like, just as a human being, right? Or if I go travel to Thailand, I want to be able to interact with people differently, not through like a Lonely Planet guide, trying to like pick up a few words, like, where's the bathroom, or whatever it might be. But like, imagine though, you have technology that can translate in real time both ways. Like you're speaking in Thai, and then I can hear that in English, and then I can speak in English, and it can spit out in Thai. And so I think like opportunities like that are tremendous. I mean, think about a world like that. Think about like the deepening of human understanding and empathy and all sorts of things that would come from that if we could all understand each other better. I mean, it sounds very simple, but it's a great use case to think about like the positive aspects of how the technology could actually improve people's lives.
I think it's great. Yeah, I think I think at the end of the day, it's about us connecting together. During the pandemic, whether it's us getting on Clubhouse and meeting new friends from around the world, or that person who was finally like, okay, let me finally try out TikTok, let me finally try Reels for the first time, or all these different things. I think we're really realizing that, or just us on Zoom right now, right? Like from weddings to baby showers, so grandma figuring out how to use it for the first time. I think it's really, really changing things. Now, as I saying, a lot of things we're doing is about like visuals and sound coming together. How has that been? Like, what things have coming back to your origins again, right? What things have you pulled from in your journey, whether you learned in school or things you learned on your own, when it comes to like building the sound of the metaverse, or what is the sound when you get a message or turn on your Oculus? Like, what things have you like learned on your own studies or back in NYU apply to these things, just so that if it's educators, if they're talking to a person who says, I want to be you when you grow up, what things should they be learning?
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, I mentioned the whole technology thing. That like, I can't say enough how hard it was to learn, like, to become technically proficient enough to like work at Google, right? To work at Meta, and not having any of that training, by education, from education, was difficult. So that's obviously number one. I think is interesting is like, the sonic sense is overlooked, right? It's like, so if there was a silent train coming at you, you need your eyes to get out of the way, right? Your ears will help you. But it's sort of like in our everyday lives, it's sort of like this set, of course, unless you're the visually impaired, it's sort of a secondary sense, right? That kind of like helps you navigate through the world. But it's overlooked, right? But it's something that if it's missing, it's like, oh my goodness, like this is like totally off, right? And I always had like a sense of that. Like I was like if I'm in a restaurant or something like that, like I hear what's going on around me, and like that what's happening around me gives me a feeling, right? It's a little different than what happens when I'm like looking at something, right? And for me personally, like I remember studying like the physics of sound, that when I was at school, and like understanding that these things are like waves, right? Like physical waves, right? That are in the space. And that's what gives us that feeling, the yin yang of the sine curve, and I, when you're talking about immersive technologies of the future, right? So there's like, we talked about the arc between like photos, text, and all the way to like the metaverse, and how like sound at some point is like essential for it to like even to work at all. Right. Like, and so now we're like way in that, right? It's like, like way in. And so one of the challenges we have is like just normal people, technologists and engineers that have been building for visual mediums forever. Like the sonic thing is also an afterthought, kind of like I was describing before. And so, one of the things that I guess had to like learning the impact of music on people's emotions, learning of the impact of sound on my own feelings, just being aware of that, and then bringing that into these designs, like, and how to design these spaces responsibly, design these sounds responsibly. So it has that immersive impact, that it emits the feeling that you want it to emit, I think is like one of the critical things. So like that I brought from my education into that space. Because things can go terribly wrong. Like you even mentioned the things like what happens when you get a notification for like a message. Well, if that sound is like way off, like you don't want to listen to that. and they won't prompt you with good feelings. Oh, my friend messaged me. It'll be like, oh my God, like, what does that sound? Now, I personally, I'm not a fan of like the Outlook email, but every time I get an email or something like that, I get a little like, oh my goodness. But that's an example of how a little bit like the sound can actually elicit an emotion. When you're in the metaverse, the sound makes you feel like you're there. Like if you're in virtual reality and you're just looking at a screen, like you just look at like, why am I looking at this screen with this glasses on? I'd rather watch it in a movie or like an IMAX or something like that. But when you hear the sound and it's spatialized and you can hear depth, you can hear some up, down, left, right, back, front, 360 in a space, it makes you feel like you're there. And so like that feeling that you get when you're in a real world restaurant or whatever it is, when you feel the buzz of the crowd, like making that happen in these digital worlds is like a huge part of like our mentality of what we're trying to do. And so, you know, that's something I'm trying to carry from like my past into that proverbial future.
Oh, that's incredible. You know, and it's great to hear that, you know, when you were taking that class, none of us could have fathomed, you know, that we're, you know, living in these spaces, living in technology in ways like this. And I definitely think it's like a really cool way that you're trying to find ways to make sure that we can truly feel like the senses, you know what I mean? Like those moments of, you know, what's making the hair stand up, that excitement, you know, or, you know, like how do you capture that excitement that like when you're getting that text message? I'll never forget on Discord, they worked with the rapper Lil Yachty, the one with the red hair, and he was doing toot toot, you know what I mean? And, you know, but eventually after hearing that like 17 times, I'm like, okay, this is not cute. Let me go back to the original sound. But It's really, really fun. It's a playful thing. And I think we take it for granted, but there's people like you who are really, really building this. I know time is going by fast. We're going through a lot. So hopefully if you have notes, definitely save them. We definitely want to hear that from you. When it comes to like the next generation, the people who are, you know, in the blockchain classes, the people who are in the classes you spoke of right now, I'm really curious, like what things, you know, you hear the term creator economy a lot. What are you doing right now in Meta for the creators who are building the future right now? Like what things are available? What things should they look out for?
Yeah, I think things to look out for, because it's again, like I was saying, it's early, right? This is a multi-year adventure, if that's the word, that we're going on together. When I think of creators, I kind of look at it from like two different perspectives. One of them is like a creator, like maybe in the more traditional sense, like a YouTube type creator or a musician, right? That's someone who like makes something and then wants to distribute it or like wants to monetize it or whatever it is, wants to build an audience around it. Then I think there's like another set of like creators, that maybe that's a loose word, but I think more of like developers, like app developers, people that are going to be able to create things on a new platform. So like one of the things of that Web 3.0 and the metaverse, broadly speaking, again, like mixed AR, VR, all that kind of stuff, is like it's a new platform. So imagine like, remember when we got iPhones? Like I remember this vividly, and I was like, oh my goodness, what is this? And then you realize like you can invent anything you want as long as it could be done by this phone. And I remember looking at remember when the first flashlight app I saw, I thought it was magic. I was like, oh my God, you can make an app that just turns that light on. Now you have a flashlight. Like it sounds silly, but at the time it was like magic. And so I think that opportunity is happening again, right? In this new space where people are going to be able to develop all sorts of new types of things like that. They're like little mini bits of magic. And so what I think we'll see from Meta and likely from others, so imagine the gaming companies, the Robloxes of the world, everybody, but specifically with Meta, like investment in these creator ecosystems, right? Both from the developer standpoint and from like the musician type artist standpoint. And what I mean by support, I mean like probably like economic development, like investment, like creator classes, like teaching people how to use and do these things, actually develop these apps and these platforms. So like I think you'll see announcements about these things very shortly. And that's kind of like the backbone of how all these things have to work, right? So like none of these things will work unless the products are awesome. And I think a lot of times people forget that like how does a product like Google, or like there's been a lot of talk about like decentralization and centralized, you know, kind of like platforms. So like, for instance, like Google, Facebook, Amazon, they're all centralized, right? And so like, and people kind of like think that's bad because like these companies might have some data, they might have access to things that you don't want them to have access to. Those are fair arguments, right? We should debate those forever and ever and ever. But I think people forget like what makes those products usable like that and what makes so many people use them is that they're awesome. And they provide like an incredible amount of utility, like an enormous leap from something that existed before. Like Google, it's organizing all of the world's information and making it accessible to people. When I was in college and when I was in high school, when I had to do a research paper, I had to go to the library and work on microfiche. I was like scrolling through like reams of paper and like just like insane, right? And just that one simple innovation, or not so simple, but that innovation like led to like a revolution, right? And that's why people use that product, right? Like, because it's amazing. And so it applies to this, because I think it's like we're at this advent of a new platform, a bunch of new technologies, a bunch of new experiences, but they have to be awesome. It's not like they can be like, okay, they have to be awesome. They have to be revolutionary. And part of that awesomeness, especially in the metaverse, is not just like us making a cool headset. It's what's in the headset, right? It's like, it's what creators put in the headset. It's what we're listening to. It's what it sounds like. It's what it feels like when you're in it. And on the developer side, it's like what those people make. Like that's what we're going to be using, right? So it's like, unless we make awesome products, like I don't say none of this stuff matters, but it won't matter as much. And the impact, the positive impact we have won't be as great. So, I would all have to say, I would expect investment. You'd see investments in the creator spaces, both from a perspective of like the artist creators and the developer creators.
Amazing. And I think it's one thing that I really appreciate when you talk about what you're building. You're always referring to the different members of the team that come together, right? It's not like, oh, I have an idea and then you did it. It's really a collective effort. I know a lot of times when it comes to talking about the creator economy versus like centralized and decentralized platforms, you talk about like how much goes to the creator, and things like that. I'm curious, like right now when it comes to Meta, like what is involved? Just kind of, I know people read the headlines. I think, we're getting it directly from you. Like, what are different ways that if someone wants to, build something that's going to be in Meta, right? What other people are involved when it comes to like a young person who's like a young developer building something? Like, what other pieces, like other team members are you working with that they might not even know?
Yeah, I'm thinking. So, as the question about like, so imagine you're at Meta and you want to build something, and like, how do you like get it from like ideation to like launching something type question? Or do you mean someone outside of Meta? Outside of Meta. That like wants to, and I just want to make sure someone outside of Meta that wants to launch something inside Meta. That's what you're talking about?
Exactly,
so I think like, I think, how do you just answer this question appropriately? Like, I think it's the same for both internal and external, right? From different angles. I think like an enormous amount of collaboration is required, right? Because like, it's not just like you're going to make something and then it's going to get uploaded to some sort of meta platform and it's just going to work, right? It's like that's not how things work, right? It's an enormous amount of collaboration. And I think like people like when they think about developing technology, I think like the outsider who's not necessarily in technology thinks like, oh, a great engineer just like has an idea and they like make something and it works. It's like, no. Like that is like maybe a prototype, maybe like that's like the equivalent of an artist's sketch, right? But what really has to happen when you're developing technology is sort of like an end-to-end process that starts with a kernel of an idea, could be an intuition. Like a lot of times for me, it's an intuition. I'm like an artistic type product engineer type person where I rely on data, but it never really sparks my initial idea. I'm a songwriter, right? So I just kind of like make stuff up. But I think like either you have that inspiration where you're just like, I got this idea, I'm going to do it. Or you're going to have some sort of indication that's going to be like, this is going to be useful, right? I think like, and that usually comes from data or some sort of user insight where you like saw a user do something, or you got feedback from a user, or you have data that tells you like, this is something that's useful. So that plus the intuition leads you to be like, all right, I think there's a problem here or a challenge here that needs to be solved. And in solving it, it makes X, Y, and Z better, right? And that beginning step, right, is enormous, right? And really hard to nail. But it's a step if you don't nail, like, yeah, okay, so if you miss that and you're like, oh, I didn't really think through like what the benefit of this thing was through like, and I didn't prove it through data or research or, then by the time you get to the end of the product development process where you're like launching something and testing it, like for sure it will fail. You failed like the fundamental questions of the entire thing. But all through that, so I think you have like user feedback that's kind of validating your intuition. And then generally you're like building some sort of prototype, right? And then that prototype, like the worst, it's like when you write a song, like eventually you're gonna have to share that with people. And people are gonna say like, that works, that doesn't work. This is cool. I like this, I don't like it. At that moment you have the prototype, you need to share it with like a network or some sort of focus group or whatever it might be to get as much product feedback as you can get. Iterate, 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 iterate. I think like people don't realize how messy the technology development process is until you actually try to build something. It's like never a straight line from like point A to point B, like ever. I've never once had like something go according to plan. I've never once launched something on time from like never, right? And so I think like having that mentality through that, you start iterating, and then you need to bring in all of the other people that know things that you don't know. And what I mean by that is like there's marketers, there's lawyers, there's operational components of it. There's like data and infrastructure pieces. I mean, it goes on, the list could go on, right? And all these other things need to be thought through too. Now, if you do your best and you think through all these things appropriately, and I'm leaving a ton out, and you get to the end where you finally launch something, then you have a chance of that thing being successful. And even then, the chance is like a chance, right? And like you improve that chance by doing all your diligence beforehand. But even then, it's still unknown, right? So you launch, you iterate, you refine, you keep going. So it's not like something that ends, right? I feel like a lot of people think like, oh, I made this thing and it's like out, it's done. It's never really done. It's like always a process of reinvention and iteration.
No, I think that's a good reminder. And also, you were talking about your background of, taking a legal route and taking those courses. And it shows that, yeah, like when it comes to building these things, the person who, might have started as a musician, but, might like, let me get that minor in pre-law, right? Like that person, if they become a lawyer, they have a seat in the table, they have a say. The person that, is a musician or a songwriter or a musician, and they're like also taking a lot of marketing classes and they get a minor in that and maybe even get an MBA. They have a seat at the table. And I think this is a really great reminder that all these different points of views are coming to build something. And it's not just, okay, yeah, I want to use my Bored Ape put it as an NFT on Instagram. And then, yeah, why not put this song in the background and make it dance? It's not like I can't just like send a DM to Meta and like make that happen. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort. Well, this is great. I know I have way more questions I can talk to you all day long, but yeah. I want to make sure the educators who are listening right now, they can get their questions in too. And we have some cool questions that go to everything from, equipment should people use, what things do people to learn. So I'm really excited to hear that. So let's start with one question. In addition to like surround sound, are they using any specific microphones or techniques like ambisonic or other types of mics to help capture this immersive audio experience?
Yeah, so I think this is an area where you'll see a lot of development over time. So I think now, obviously, like ambisonic mics in the studios are being used all the time, right? So we're doing a couple of things. Like one, we're taking like from a music perspective, just sound perspective too. We're taking a lot of the content that we have developed over the years, again, predominantly for videos products. So like, remember I was saying you could take a song or sound, put it behind a reel or behind a video. Well, in the future, all that stuff needs to be spatialized in some way for certain experiences, right? So there's some experiences where imagine you have a radio on a table in the metaverse, a 2-track stereo mix for anything will be fine because you're listening to it out of that as you would like a stereo in your house. But on the other hand, if we were to develop something that's like, what is it like to walk into a song, right? Just kind of that crazy idea of just like, what does that even mean? But that's the type of stuff that can be contemplated. Well, then you're going to need the song to feel like you're in that space, and there's a purpose for why that sound's over there and that's over there, and what happens to those sounds when you move through the space. Like sounds change when you, like Doppler effect as an example, like sounds change as you move through space. So maybe those things should apply in the metaverse spaces. So I think like there's a certain set of things that need to be done with like doing Atmos and different types of spatialized mixes for content that exists. For capture going forward, we're using all sorts of ambisonic mics to figure out like how to like to mimic how a creator might do that at scale in the future. Because like imagine you're developing, like today we're developing products for creators to create things in a 2D app world, like Reels or Facebook video or whatever it might be. Mic, any sort of mic will do as long as it sounds good. right? But in the future, when you're developing like, oh, like the kind of the idea of like, oh, what is it going to be like when someone walks into my song? Well, that's going to require something totally different. And so I think like we need to figure that out internally first, like the right ways to do that. And I think we should look to see how that should be scaled so that like in the future, these ambisonic type recording technology could be in the hand of as many people as possible. Maybe even considering building that into, things that people could buy, like hardware.
Wow, great. Thanks so much for that. Another one just like information. I know we talked about like you learning a lot of things on your own. Are there any resources or tools that you think will be great to give students if they want to dig deeper?
Yeah, I'm loath to like cite a specific type of resource because like I think there's a lot. But I the only thing I can encourage people to do is at this point, because like it's not like there's like it's so new that there's not enough gravity, I guess, or like it's not like solid enough to be like, here is the 101 class version of this stuff and push it out. And so I think what needs to be taught, and maybe this is too much of an editorial, it's sort of like in these classes, it's not so much like, and I appreciate the question. I'm not trying to demean the question at all. There's so much like from the students, they want the answer, right? And it's sort of like there is no answer. That sounds crazy. And so what's required is like an ethos and something that's built in these students. It's like no one's going to give you the answer, and you got to go get it. And so I think it's more like a constant hunt, because any resource that's like put out today, like will need to be updated tomorrow to stay relevant. Things are happening so fast. So like as a silly example of like a behavioral thing that I've even employed just to be able to like stay on top of the info is like, I wake up now, like at some ungodly hour, like between 4:30 and 5 a.m, right? And the whole host of reasons why I always get up early, but like I use that time in the morning to like, to level set, kind of like mental health check, meditate, yoga, whatever it might be. And then it's like, get as much information about what's going on around me as possible for like an hour to start the day. It could be from like 5 to 6 in the morning. And I've been doing that now for like years, right? And that is an enormous benefit of like just staying on top of things, like understanding what's like learning things that I have no idea about, like constantly like learn every day. I'm spending hours learning something that I don't know about. And there's no like one source for that. It's just like hunting through every single thing that I can find and absorbing it and like assimilating into some sort of viewpoint that fits like my ethos and the things that I'm trying to accomplish as a person, as a professional. And so like, rather than, I know it's not an answer, right? It's not the easy answer. Like, hey, here's you go xyz.com and like, it's all there. But it's like more, I think it's really encouraging people to like develop that type of discipline in the students, because like that, I think that's what it takes. You know what I mean? To like be able to like to roll in this environment. It's not for everybody, but like that's how I do it. And it's the best advice I could give.
I mean, you're building the future, like, and we kind of hit this out. You're kind of figuring out the sound for, AR, the sound for the metaverse. A lot of times when people say, what is Web 1.0, 2.0, 3, Web 3, I kind of say like, Web 1 is like, okay, you can Google and get the answer. You know what I mean? You can go to Google, remember, you can go to Ask Jeeves, and you can kind of figure out, okay, like what is the metaverse, right? Like Web 2 is like, okay, like let me search like hashtag metaverse on Instagram and like, okay, let's see what other people say. I can respond, maybe my data is involved with what I'm saying. Maybe my mic is on, and Web 3 is what we're doing right now. Like we are really, really building it. What's happening now is not going to be the same as tomorrow. Definitely won't be the same when it comes to like, when school goes back into session next year. So it's really, really, really building it. Well, I just want to say thank you. I know we went through a lot. I know people's brain is probably spun with all the information that you provided right now. I'm glad that you referred to like classes you took back in the day, information you learned on your own. And it's really cool to hear from someone who's really kind of building brick by brick what we're seeing in the future. So thank you so, so, so much for taking the time. Thank you for everyone listening. This has been an amazing summit. I know there's a lot more happening today, but I just want to thank you for coming here today and just, sharing this information with all of us today.
Oh no, thanks for having me. Thanks for moderating, and thanks to the group for listening. Hopefully it was helpful to some degree. I'm sure, like you said, I'm sure the minds are racing. but it's a great opportunity, and I'm happy to do it anytime.
Amazing. Well, we're done here. And then we're gonna have a lot more great information today. And if anyone wants to like learn more from you, what's the best way for someone to get in touch with like what's going on right now, what you're doing in MEIEA? What's the best resource to stay in touch?
With me personally?
Or just in general, like, is there like a newsletter? Is there like a, information page? Like, what's the best way for people to stay in touch with stuff that you all are building?
Yeah. So there's like there's a couple different blogs that MEIEA, like when they generally put out information. So there's like one for the overall company, then there's a media blog, and then there's also a creator blog. So I would say those three, you could find them if you Google them. Those three are the ones that would have the most information.
Well, amazing. Well, everyone stay tuned, and thank you so much. And thank you for building. We appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you. Thanks, everybody.